it be?
Born in Ghana in 1935 when it was still called the Gold Coast, Kofi Awoonor was educated at Achimota School and then proceeded to the University of Ghana, where he later taught African literature. While at the University of Ghana, he wrote his first poetry book, Rediscovery, published in 1964, writing under the name George Awoonor Williams. His works combine the poetic traditions of his native Ewe people with a touch of contemporary and religious symbols to depict Africa during the colonial era. Awoonor was Ghana's ambassador to Brazil from 1984 to 1988, before serving as his country's ambassador to Cuba. From 1990 to 1994, Awoonor was Ghana's permanent representative to the United Nations, where he headed the Committee Against Apartheid. He was also a former chairman of the Council of State. Professor Kofi Awoonor was among those who were killed in the September 2013 attack at Westgate shopping mall in Nairobi, Kenya.
It's good to have you here, Ife.
Thank you very much, Kunle. It's a pleasure to be here.
Okay, Professor Kofi Awoonor just passed away tragically.
Tragically.
What's your impression of him and his works?
Well, you know, I got the news on Facebook about less than 24 hours after it happened, and you know, my first reaction was, wow, oh wow, you know, and because not just because of the passing on of a very great and respected poet, you know, but because it was happening, you know, in the midst of an important festival, the Story Mojahe Festival also, you know, so we've lost a great ancestor, you know, as it were. I met Professor Kofi through his works as a teenager. You know, I had this collection of West African verse, you know, I used to carry around. I mean, I read it to shreds, you know, and he used to be known by George Awoonor Williams. You know, and you had poems like, you know, Songs of Sorrows, A Call, The Weaver Bed, you know, and all of them. So he's a great man, he's a great poet, and we definitely will miss him.
Well, how would you place him in contemporary African poetry history, so to speak? What's his position? I mean, what's his place when we begin to talk about poetry in Africa?
It's almost obvious, you know, from the, you know, overwhelming, you know, sorrow, you know, and the response that greeted, you know, the news of his death, you know, sort of puts a light on, you know, the importance of his role, you know, in contemporary, you know, African literature as a whole, not just poetry now, you know, because Professor Kofi belongs to the generation of the Shoinkas, the generation of the Okigbos, the generation of the Chinua Achebes, you know, and he happens to be one of the, you know, few left from that generation, you know, that happens to be thinning out now. So I think he holds an important, you know, place, you know, in contemporary African literature.
What's your take on the attack? On
senseless violence. And there's a sense in which we are yet to come to terms with the encroaching evil, you know, that is terrorism, particularly in Africa. You know, about 3 days ago, we woke up to the news of the death of about 20 conflicting figures of students, you know, and they went into the hostels and shot them randomly. So it's tragic in every sense, and I think it calls for an urgent response, which I don't think we are getting enough of that yet. Not just from the end of government, but from the end of, you know, civil society and people. We need to stand up as a people, as Africans, and reject this evil in its entirety.
People like you, the talented young poets now, it's up to you to start flying that flag, you know, and all that. Tell us a bit about your works currently. What are you doing now?
Well, I'm putting finishing touches to my collection of poetry called When the Revolution Spoke. It's a book and an audio CD. You know, initially it was just going to be an audio CD, you know, but there's been a lot of pressure, particularly from, you know, the literary circle, to accompany with a book. So it's going to be a book, and an audio CD should be out early next year, first quarter of next year. all things being equal.
I'm going to ask you to read two poems. One for, well, both in honor of Professor Awoonor. Maybe one of his own poems and then one of yours.
I'm going to read a call from Professor Kofi Awoonor. She did not call me by name, not by the name my mother gave me. She called me by another name, a word. I have not heard it before, yet I knew it was me. Will you come under the cashew tree beside the cemetery? I know no cashew tree beside the cemetery. No, I don't. Yet I will go. Perhaps a revelation awaits me. Have they discovered the colored cowrie? Or the specific herbs that will conjure? They perhaps have found the lost wanderer. I went after her. She stood still beneath the cashew and spoke not a word.
Let's hear yours.
Okay. That night we crossed the precipice, headlong into bedlam and destruction. That fleeing pack of confusion pouring through the borders, our images captured by feverish reporters, fodder for the global news media. Yes, remember the chaos? That was us. Hours after the Northerners rejected the elected candidates from the South, rogue imams spitting blood in their ears, igniting their hearts after they killed the first Christian, after they touched the first house. Anuka, his wife, and 3 daughters aged 2, 6, and 8 perished in the flames of hate that night. Their story and images of the carnage in the north took flight on the wings of beats and bites to greet anxious eyes and ears across the south, who consumed the news on their mobile phones, computer screens, television, newspapers, word of mouth. And so fresh fires were lighted in the east and old drums began to play, accompanied by new songs and strange dances. A festival of violence was underway. Aminu, Jubril, Ahmed, severed limbs, a detached head, and entrails forcibly ejected from the stomach that once housed them. Who can douse a raging inferno by spitting words? Paper barricades can't push back angry floods. Who could stop over 250 bickering tribes from dissolving their fragile union into a grisly mess of tears and blood? And so the South-South declared themselves the Niger Delta Republic and claimed as leader the stone the builders had rejected. While in that old cosmopolitan space in the Southwest, simmering discontent erupted. The Yorubas attacked the Igbos attacked the Fulanis. Natives of the old Bendel fled the city. Pity, because it didn't take long before that vexatious divide was breached and the poor fell upon the rich. Shegun, Nkechi, Dixon, guilty as charged. The only evidence the mob needed was driving in an air-conditioned car. From Lekki to Okokomaiko, territories were marked by thugs. From Bodilon to Marina, nary a word was heard. Peace, keep calm, the situation is under control, they yelled from the capital. The police joined the looting. The army splintered into groups of tribal militias. Angry young revolutionaries stormed the Senate building. We feigned sanity until madness could stomach our hypocrisy no more. It unleashed itself and we dispersed, scattered over 1,000 borders where we now lay, broken like our dreams. Poets, doctors, lawyers, teachers, critics of a government we now long for. Abandoned by fate, we embrace doubt as the only prism through which we now view a world given to fits of hysteria. With the bitter taste of nostalgia in our mouths, our minds reach back for that space we once called home, that place they once called Nigeria.
Ife, also touching. Scary.
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 I hope it conveys, the effect
That was scary.
What could happen if we don't pull back deliberately and consciously.
That was scary. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much, Colin. It's a pleasure.
I hope to have you here again.
I hope to be here again.
Thanks.